Full house. Sometimes I think always the perfect number is usually three, and then I send so many emails I don't have the heart to take anyone off. So we so with us today, Professor Dave McEwen, Rob Stutzman, and Tim Rosales as well, representing Northern California, and I should say Northern California well represented at the rally that I was just at, which is at out in front of Representative David Valadao's office. These continued targets by I know left-wing groups, progressive groups, and a lot of healthcare groups and unions out in front of vulnerable Republican Congress members. David Valadao considered as such in his district. The Cook PVI actually recently moved it to an R+1 from a D+5, but Valadao's only loss ever as a congressman, a midterm during during Trump's first term in office. So that's why this is very important. A new Democratic challenger emerging as well, Randy Villegas. Didn't see him there. I've seen him at every other thing until today, who may be providing an alternative to Rudy Salas. We'll start with you, Professor. It's been some time. What is the importance of these events just continuing to happen and continue to keep the pressure on David Valadao, even though he says, I'm really not going to ever vote to gut Medicaid? The language is an interesting one right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what's going on, kind of a broader picture, there's going to be a buildup, obviously, to the 100-day mark next week on Wednesday for the Trump administration. Then we move into that May period, and May is an interesting period because of what Republicans want to do relative to rescission and reconciliation to get that big, beautiful bill headed in towards Memorial Day. That'll be a heavy lift, but Democrats are pushing back, and you notice one particular area on healthcare. That's where Nancy Pelosi is really leading the charge. And they're targeting districts, not just, for example, like David Valadao's district, but they're trying to make that a national push for Democrats in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, as also a setup to what potentially could happen on the Senate side headed into the midterms. So Democrats are starting to get a heartbeat. They still don't exactly have that leader, but they're really kind of pushing that ball uphill because they sense some momentum headed to those midterms. I think you see that today in Valadao's district, but you also, Democrats are searching for a message. And so that makes the next couple of weeks, these next 2 to 4 weeks, really important. It puts a lot of pressure on Mike Johnson, but it also is a place where maybe a Democrat comes through on these messages, maybe not. But also, where does the president sit in terms of branding this reauthorizing and bringing America back again kind of legislation? It's going to be an exciting next couple of weeks.
And Rob, the whole language seems to be that, well, the vote that was voted on a couple months back now essentially gave it up to the executive branch about what they want to do exactly. The president has said he doesn't want benefits touched. Congress members Valadao, Vince Vaughn say they don't want Medicaid benefits touched, and therefore Medi-Cal benefits touched. That was another promise. We saw a letter from Representative Valadao to Mike Johnson as well. But the pressure is still on. Is it a misguided pressure? Is this an accurate debate? Is this something that touches voters and wants to motivate them to get out there and vote and be active if their benefits are at risk?
Well, you're a long way from an election, I think, to suggest any of this is motivating votes in November of 26. But it's affecting politics and it's affecting policy. I mean, the squeeze that Speaker Johnson has, of course, is that if we do what the president wants with tax cuts, you're perpetuating the national debt, and there are deficit hawks in the Republican conference that are insisting on there being cuts. And so you get to, well, where can those cuts be? Well, let's skip Social Security and Medicare, and you get the Medicaid. And so that's where this discussion is. So I do think, like these demonstrations, the pressure that's being put on in districts such as Valadao's is having a policy impact. And which way it goes remains to be seen, but it's really squeezing the speaker as he tries to fashion some type of deal that could actually pass his chamber.
Tim, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think in terms of what is going on with Congressman Valadao, it's kind of right out of, Democrat playbook, political playbook for the last 20 years. I mean, we saw this, not too many years ago with a guy by the name of Richard Pombo, who represented, part of kind of the northern part of the Central Valley, and he was the chair of natural resources at the time, a Republican in one of these swing kind of districts. And what the environmental groups did for a full year and a half, almost 2 years before he before the election was just constant barraging every day on environmental issues. And that had an erosion effect over time. I think what the Democrats are trying to do here with Valadao is somewhat, very similar. The Democrats always have an advantage when it comes to talking about things like Medicaid, healthcare, and those types of issues, Social Security, et cetera. That's where they lean into. And so, I think it's typical that they do that here. Republicans, on the other side, Democrats were never going to out tax cut Republicans, right? So that's certainly, an issue set that advantages Republicans. So Republicans are kind of leaning in, or they're going to lean into their anti-tax and tax cutting kind of message, and you see Democrats are going to kind of lean into the Social Security and health care and those types of message points. And I agree with what's been said is that you've got the Democratic Party. It's really searching for a cohesive message, and whether or not President Trump can consolidate the Republicans on with a real cohesive message and some policy directives here. Those two things really we don't know yet.
Professor, last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Rob's right in terms of the length of time, the forward looking. I mean, look, if we're looking at 2026, you got over 300 days in which a candidate can enter a race. That election is 400 days away. That's a long time. There's a lot of water under the bridge between here and there. And you're also dealing, I think, as both Rob and Tim pointed out, you're dealing with Speaker Johnson. He doesn't have one Freedom Caucus. He's got four elements of the Freedom Caucus. And so he's got a 9 or 10 person kind of core, and then he's got up to 45 to 55 members. That's a big swath to hold together in the next couple of weeks as they try to develop a bill around the cuts and reconciliation. That's going to be a set of tight margins, and you can't have one member get sick. So if there's an outbreak of influenza, you're missing votes right there. So there's a little bit of a high wire act, I think, here, while there's going to be a lot of pressure from the White House on Speaker Johnson. It'll be interesting to watch to see how he manages all of this.
Yeah, and when we think about staking or claiming this as well, we're looking at a tour that has been going on across the country. AOC, Bernie Sanders wanting to, I think, find some sort of momentum, some sort of voice for the party in the future. Of course, AOC would be eligible for the presidency in 2028. Bernie Sanders would be too, but that's that's getting up there if we want to continue the trend of who knows, maybe we can get to what goes after octogenarian. I can't even think of that term for that. We don't have one yet. But the point being that they were here for in Bakersfield, in between Los Angeles and Sacramento for a rally last week. Very interesting to see the turnout there. The building that they're in, for those not familiar with Bakersfield, is there's an arena which seats 10,000. There's an adjacent theater that seats 4,000. They went to the theater that sat 4,000, a little bit different from what we saw outside of Sacramento and outside of LA, where you're looking at numbers around 30,000 or so. When we think about people continuing to come through the Central Valley, Rob, how important is it to find a voice? I mean, is that what both the protests today are about? And then also AOC and Bernie just trying to find a direction or a voice for the party going forward?
Well, I think there's a lot of things going on. So in terms of the crowds and who's being attracted, to these rallies, it's base progressive, Democrats who are frustrated because they just got their rears kicked and they're out of power, and they're horrified about a lot of things that Donald Trump is doing. So it makes sense that there's this huge energy of anger, desperation, and fear in the base that leads to large turnouts. Harken back to the Tea Party movement when the Democrats controlled all levers of government after Obama won, and you had a similar type of phenomenon. Just to draw a comp of bases get activated when they're out of power, looking to lash out against those that are in power. So that's happening. That's drawing the crowds. What's going on with AOC, that's kind of interesting because there is obviously a huge vacuum at the top of the party. Gavin Newsom's wandering around in a dark room trying to figure out what the future of the party is, or for himself, as he, I think, said this week that he doesn't even recognize the Democrat Party anymore. After I think he's spent the last 7 years largely defining it in this country. So there's a leadership vacuum. And so AOC, I think, is out there seeing what kind of national movement she could build. And you've seen her move beyond being just the squad, right? And she has moved into leadership within her conference. She is trying to, I don't know about moderate herself so much as institutionalize herself a little bit more, which is what you have to do to be an effective leader in your party, especially in Congress. And I think she's feeling it out. Is there enough wind in the sails to maybe actually take a run at a presidential bid in 28. She's young. She's got options galore. She could run for the U.S. Senate, when Chuck Schumer retires, or go primary him, as some people want her to. I don't think she will. But I think this is really about whether or not she's going to start filling a vacuum beyond just the progressive base as one of the few leaders that are going to emerge for the Democrats nationally heading into 28.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point about the Schumer race. I've seen a poll. I can't quote the exact poll that I'm thinking of, but I saw it on Real Clear Politics of a 55-36 for in her favor against Chuck Schumer in 2026. Now, this is way out, way before an election would even take place, but it's a notable poll, I think at least. And Tim, when we were speaking with people outside the rally, we're trying to gauge a sense where everyone's excited about. Everyone's kind of looking for that next leader of the party. We spoke with some people, AOC 2028 all the way. Some other people saying really like the speech today. Want to kind of see what she does legislatively going forward. What policies does she have? Which I thought was a really interesting answer from some of the people we spoke to. But Tim, is a New York Senate step? What's next? And kind of giving Democrats that are on the progressive side of the aisle more power as they go into 2028 and that presidential election, kind of starting to stake their ground not only in the House but in the Senate.
Well, I mean, Rob said it earlier. I mean, the Democrats got literally, spanked in 2024 because they were too far to the left. And, that's not where America and American voters were really voting. And that's not what was defining American voters, but the Democrats, that's where they went. And it seems like they're doubling down right now on that kind of leftward surge. I mean, we've seen this kind of new term called dark woke, come up, which is this, combative, expletive-laced kind of attack of values that are not far to the left progressive. And they seem to be, really trying to entrench themselves there. And certainly when you have individuals like AOC and others within the Democratic Party, Jasmine Crockett from Texas and others that are really trying to elevate themselves, that really do come from that far left progressive branch. The Democratic Party right now is, and you hear the rumblings of it amongst more moderates in the Democratic Party, and that is they are struggling, like the professor had said earlier, where they're going to go and what their direction is, because you've got this group, again, Sanders, AOC, Crockett, others that are just really trying to get them entrenched in this far left progressive ideology. And from a Republican standpoint, I think, those of us on that side of the aisle are saying, please keep going that direction, because that is just not where kind of the moderate base really of the American people are. But that's where it seems like they're going with some of these tours and the rhetoric and everything that they're doing right now.
Does there come moderation, Professor, with power if she were to run for that office? Does the responsibility of saying, okay, I got to get outside of this little part of New York and represent the whole state, does there come with a sensibility of, okay, I'm talking to more people than just what's inside my bubble? And obviously I'm going right now out on tour and talking to people that maybe see my ideology across the country, maybe testing those waters. But when you ascend office, won't there be just a general moderation in general?
Well, she's going to have some elements of that. She has nothing to lose by being out there with Bernie while Democrats search for that message. She also has the opportunity to raise money nationally. That opportunity to raise money nationally, I think, does give her a little bit more wind in her sails, as Rob was talking about. And as Tim noted, look, that there's going to be elements of some of these issues that are going to be problematic. If you look at what's happened, for example, on immigration and crime, while Donald Trump's overall net approval on those issues has come down, he's still sticking at the Democrats. He's still pretty strong in that realm. It might be different because of tariffs and the economy. He might be underwater on presidential approval. But on issues of immigration and crime, issues that are tough for Democrats, especially on the progressive side, those issues are ones that could dog her as she builds this national profile. Bernie's message, the BS message, the Bernie Sanders message, is all about the economy and the economic messages there. It's remained there for some time. She has to show she has a little nuance and maturity. I'd argue, too, this is the same kind of dilemma that Gavin Newsom has had. He has to show that he's an adult now, that he's politically mature. And he's been searching for that, whether that's on a podcast or whether that's, going across the country talking to folks on Fox or whatever it looks like. He hasn't really found that voice, but he's been all over for that voice. Does AOC really make that same mistake? I think that's one of the challenges she has. She does have opportunities opportunities because of her youth. There's also a moment of generational change that's going on here with the Democratic Party, and that provides opportunities for her nationwide to build that base and to talk to others to build that team.
And then speaking of governors and governors' races, we're going to talk about Steve Hilton. We'll start with Tim, who's been telling me for months about Steve Hilton possibly jumping in this race. What does he offer as an alternative to the other Republican in the race, Chad Bianco, who's kind of that other big figure at the moment? And is it a message that, can really win a governor's race for a Republican? I mean, that's, I think, the big question, especially when the campaign slogan is, I believe, make California golden again, is a play on words of MAGA. I don't know if that's the cross message platforming that works, but we'll find out.
Well, I mean, certainly Steve Hilton's been flirting with this for a long time, so it wasn't any surprise that he entered the governor's race, although the timing was a little curious on Monday. But the fact is, I think for him, he's really leaned into the Trump messaging and that type of thing. And I think there's probably something there with the base, but is there enough there? You've got a very well respected candidate in terms of Chad Bianco, a Riverside County sheriff, who's already been out there, kind of making the rounds on that front. And then there are other candidates out there who have not announced. I mean, guys like Ethan Penner and others who are going to be potentially looking at this, those who have come from a business background and that type of a thing, that from the Republican side. So I think Hilton is going to have that struggle of what is different and what is more advantageous about him than someone like any of these other Republican candidates. And of course, you get too many Republicans in, and that really starts to divide up the Republican vote, especially if none of them can, raise the funds that it takes in order to communicate effectively in California, which is, as Rob well knows, I mean, it's a huge amount of dollars there. So, I think that Mr. Hilton is gonna have some trouble trying to, initially he gets kind of the attention, but then, okay, where do you go to really set yourself apart, other than being a media personality? And that's, I think, going to be the question for Mr. Hilton.
And Rob, I know that we'll have Sheriff Bianco in, I think, in less than a month from now here at the station to talk with us a little bit. Matt Klink seems to suggest that that's a tough go for the lawman as well, and to find what that messaging is. I have to name drop Matt because, it's Matt. But when you look at these two candidates, you have someone, I think, in Chad Bianco, who the messaging around Prop 36, he was everywhere around the state. He's been everywhere around the state for stuff that goes to law reforms and criminal reforms around the state, versus Steve Hilton, who, okay, he has the national appeal from Fox News, but what has he been in everyone's community or everyone's media? And I can tell you, just even as a Fox affiliate, the amount of content that we get is more from Bianco talking about things that happen around the state, more so than what Steve Hilton's show was at one point.
Well, I think both of them are going to, one, struggle to raise their name ID without money, as Tim was indicating. They both, there was a poll last week that was out, but Hilton wasn't on it. Bianco was like 4%. I think Hilton would be about the same right now. So what's at stake here to elevate them in a primary is the Trump endorsement. And I think Hilton has a bit of a leg up there. He's got a longer relationship with Trump, and it's a real relationship. The president actually knows him and talks to him. That could be, that's the type of thing I would look to be this kind of differentiating issue in the primary. I think it's all for naught. And as we've seen in recent statewide elections, a front-running Democrat will be very tempted to pull one of them up into second place to make sure it's a non-competitive Dem versus R runoff. I know there's a lot of hope right now amongst Republicans that this could be the time to flip the switch and elect a Republican governor, and I just don't see it. It's a basic math issue. It's why a Democrat won't be governor of Idaho next year either. And if it were to happen, it's going to take someone that has much higher name ID, is probably a more experienced and polished type of candidate or public figure than these two gentlemen. And I don't see who that person is at the moment. Arnold Schwarzenegger can't run for a third term.
Mel Gibson has baggage. Kevin McCarthy said he won't run. So it's finding that person. I think the big question, Professor, too, is We spoke with Antonio Villaraigosa on Friday. He came to the station, spoke with our Michael Patterson for an interview. He's trying to make those arguments about energy, gas not being a transitional fuel, trying to get ahead of that right now. Javier Becerra, who I had still indicated he's a progressive, but also says he wants to totally redo California's budget, doesn't really provide any details. Are they trying to be that alternate option for Republicans if there's a quote unquote lack of a strong candidate, as the polling has indicated so far?
Yeah, I think this is actually shaping up to be a fascinating race at many levels. Neither Rob or Tim mentioned Rick Caruso. All right, and Rob knows what it takes to get a moderate elected in a blue state. The state's been bluer than it was before. It's hard to see someone who can't spend a lot of money to be there in this race and to not just be in the place where you're representing, 15% of the knuckle dragger caucus or 15% of the professor caucus, whatever that looks like, to really get there for most voters. We are a long ways away, and I don't see that how Becerra or Villaraigosa gets there, but they are trying to present this alternative. I'm not in a place where I think the former vice president, is running for California governor. Who wants to run this state? It's difficult. Republicans do have a chance because LA burned, and they burned on a blue watch because of homelessness. There are opportunities for them if they have the right candidate. But for Democrats, are they going to have a whole bunch of people who can corral little bits of the vote but can't get there in the general election, or the people aren't too excited about? And if that candidate is going to emerge as someone like Katie Porter, Republicans do have a chance because they have a field day, or an independent has a field day, even in a top two place, because some of these ads, I think, write themselves in terms of the visuals and what's there. So it is a very interesting place. You also have more than half the legislature that's terming out from 24 to 26. This is a big generational change. And as a result, we're going to see a lot more Dem on Dem violence. We're going to see a lot more cases of the top two. And that's where an element of revamping the top two for both parties presents an opportunity through the ballot measure process, where we know there's going to be a lot of things on the ballot. So it's actually shaping up, I think, to be a very exciting election, even though it's really far down the road. And Republicans haven't have a chance that frankly, I don't think they've had since Arnold and the recall during that time, and they haven't elected anyone statewide since 2006. So they've been out in the political wilderness. Here's your chance, fellas. I think this is a great opportunity here to move someone forward.
And then Tim, if you can just describe real quick, and we'll I think maybe close with Rob here too. Just what does it mean for the power balance that we're talking about? A lot of these people that lead the state have close ties to Sacramento or the Bay Area. What would it mean to have that sort of reconfiguration of how the state works, and see maybe power balance shift to parts like Southern California or the Central Valley in ways that maybe they haven't in some time?
Well, I think it'd be great if we could shift, power balances, to Central Valley or Southern California, or kind of mix it up, like we've seen at periods of time in the past, certainly not necessarily the Central Valley, but, Southern California. There is a Northern California kind of, inequitable, power right now. Moving that to Southern California would certainly, I think, be interesting, because California has all of these, regional different, various regional issues. The most interesting part of that, though, would be to get and move that power balance to the Central Valley, which I think would Democrats and Republicans in the Central Valley would probably welcome, equally, and they wouldn't care who it is, because you have that kind of that Central Valley, hey, we can go ahead and attack each other, but we don't want LA and San Francisco coming after us. Then we start to fight, and I think that would make for some really unique future in California. I do think that with that, though, we still see with some of this, one of the biggest predictors of how people are going to vote is their partisan registration, and as has been said, in California we have a math problem in terms of Republicans have a math problem over Democrats, although Republicans are increasing. And as a professor noted, we've got there have been some tremendous gains, and we saw some in the legislature last year, and potentially could be some in 2026. Some of that's going to be dependent upon what's happening in Washington, D.C., with the Trump administration. But the opportunity here for some differences, and certainly California needs to move forward in a different way than it has been, because whether you're on the Republican or Democratic side, you see that the last decade and a half has not been moving in the right direction. I think all Californians on both sides of the aisle would agree on that.
And Rob, I'll give you the final word. I want to ask you one question though, too. If as the professor noted too, with who wants to run California? Well, does it help Kamala Harris in 2026 if she comes in, puts in executive orders, has control of the legislature, and does some really big changes, runs for 2 years and then runs for the presidency? Does that make any kind of sense? Or once again, are we in the year 2025 and it's way too early?
If she runs for governor, she's not running for president. She's going to have to make an ironclad promise on that. Californians are fed up with a governor that's running for president. It really, they don't like it. They want people to focus on their day job. And then is she prepared to do the day job? Because whoever is the next governor has difficult things to do. Tough budget. Homelessness isn't solved. It's intolerable. People want it solved. The energy regulations in this state are making the state unaffordable. They have to be reset, reevaluated. There needs to be a new, smoother glide path set to our climate goals. There's nothing about Kamala Harris that suggests she's interested in, goring those oxes on the progressive environmental left in order to get that done. So I just don't see it. It's going to be a very difficult job. It needs to be somebody that realizes that they have to come in and fix things, not so much worry about their popularity, or running for another office, but really fix these endemic problems, as Tim indicated, Democrats and Republicans are frustrated with. Anyone running for Gavin Newsom's third term is going to have very lackluster support.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting thing. And of course, we have a number of candidates that are already in this governor's race that are within that web of Newsom's executive branch as we speak right now. It'll be interesting to see once it comes to debate time, or if it comes to endorsing other candidates, which way they go, how they differ themselves, all that things. Another big question is whether or not the next governor would inherit the podcast. It's not clear at this point, but we'll see at some point if that's what happens. But
I don't see Katie Porter sitting with all those MAGA bros on a podcast very well.
It'd be more like a SmackDown than it would a podcast.
That would be interesting theater, I think, though.
Look,
more interesting than Gavin's podcast.
Right. Yeah.
I went to the University of Iowa, and I can tell you that there is Iowa nice, but there's also Iowa tough. And Katie Porter is Iowa tough, and she, I don't know how great those conversations would go. But thank you well, they'd be entertaining, but thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your time, and have a good rest of your day. We'll have this out later today.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you
very much. Nice to see you.
Take care, guys.